be today here with you
Recording is on.
to give this virtual seminar. Of course, I would prefer to visit you after this post-COVID, post-apocalyptic era at Santiago de Compostela, but for the moment we'll be content with the virtual seminar. So I'm planning to talk to you about the extraction of light cone parton distribution functions from lattice QCD. And this is work done in collaboration mainly with people who were or are still at JLab, like Joe Karpi, Kostas Orginos, Anatoly Radyushkin, David Richards, Raza Soufian, and Alexander Rotkov from Stavanger University. And I'm going to talk about the results of different papers. So in those papers, different combinations and permutations of these authors will appear. But let us start from a very simple introduction, since I did not know the exact background of everyone in the audience. I'm trying to start from the very basics, and if those are things which are very well known to people who know them very well, and they are experts, I would apologize if I make them bored with the first couple of slides. So let us start off by some definitions of parton distribution functions. So the very name parton is the name proposed by Richard Feynman in 1969 as a generic description of the particles that constitute the nucleons. Obviously, a model assuming that the nucleon is made out of 3 valence quarks sitting in a bag is way too simple. And of course, it cannot reproduce the experimental results for scattering processes within elastic scattering of electrons of protons. Actually, hadrons look more like this image, and they are relativistic many-body systems where valence quarks are embedded in a sea of virtual QQ-bar pairs created by the gluons. So the nucleon structure is experimentally very intensively investigated, but can in principle be accessed also with theoretical calculations. Okay. So we can study all these nice effects and the structure of the hadrons through deep inelastic scattering experiments, as you can see from this cartoon. In such a process, the leptons act as a probe transferring form momentum Q to the nucleon in order to resolve its partonic structure. The resolving power of the probe is given by 1 over Q, and the resolution increases with Q. So with a Q of 100 GeV, the resolution is given by roughly 0.02 Fermi. Friedman, Kendall, and Taylor were awarded the Nobel Prize in 1990 for their pioneering experiments at SLAC back in 1966, which showed the first evidence of partonic structure of the nucleon. So the target in the deep inelastic scattering experiments can be seen as a stream of partons carrying a fraction x of the longitudinal momentum. The momentum distribution functions of partons within the proton are called parton distribution functions, or PDFs for short, and they represent the probability densities, or better, the number densities, to find a parton carrying a fraction x of the total nuclear momentum at squared energy scale q squared. Okay, some key facts about QCD. We know that one of the key properties is asymptotic freedom. Therefore, interactions between partons become arbitrarily weak at higher and higher energies or shorter and shorter distances. And actually, perturbation theory can make predictions about the rate of change or the evolution of PDFs when the energy scale q squared changes. These QCD evolution equations were firstly discovered by Doxger, Gripov, Lipatov, Altarelli, and Parisi, and they are called the Diglap equations for short. However, the x-dependence of the PDFs, as we will explain in more detail later, cannot be predicted by perturbation theory. Why PDFs are of paramount importance? Because of the fact that the uncertainties of the PDFs are the dominant theoretical uncertainties in Higgs couplings, alpha strong, and the mass of the W boson. And beyond actually the physics of the Large Hadron Collider, PDFs play an important role, for instance, in astroparticle physics, such as for the accurate predictions for signal and background events at ultra-high energy neutrino telescopes, where you have DIS mediated by neutrino, in telescopes such as ANITA, IceCube, and the Pierre Auger Observatory. And actually, PDFs will always keep playing an important role for any future high-energy collider involving hadrons in the initial state. Therefore, improving our understanding of PDFs also strengthens the physics potential of such future colliders, such as the electron-ion collider, which hopefully will be built at Brookhaven National Lab in the United States, or the future circular collider that hopefully will be built eventually in Europe at CERN. Also, going for a moment outside of the strict realm of standard model physics, PDF uncertainties are also very important for the search of BSM physics. And actually, the uncertainty on the PDFs is rapidly becoming one of the limiting factors in the searches of new physics. So as we can see by studying this paper by Ben Acker and company, they studied the gluino pair production at the LHC, as you can see from this Feynman diagram. And what they claim is that the relative size of the next to leading log corrections for the gluino pair production, as you can see, that was computed in that paper, and the error in the relative size of these corrections grows very quickly as the gluino mass is increased, as you can see by the x-axis of the right-hand side. And this was its author as mainly a consequence of the large PDF errors at the large values of x. And I will explain in the next slides why the large values of x is precisely the domain in X where the lattice could be of help relatively very quickly. So how do we obtain information about the PDFs? The very measurement of PDFs is actually made possible due to factorization theorems. Intuitively, these theorems are telling us that the same universal non-perturbative objects, the PDFs, which are representing long-distance physics, can be combined with many short-distance calculations in QCD to give the cross-sections of various processes. In terms of an equation, this would read by this simple equation, sigma equals FO times H, where sigma is a cross-section, a generic cross-section, F are the PDFs, and capital H is the hard perturbative path, and O times is a convolution. Therefore, PDFs truly characterize the hadronic target, and therefore it's natural to understand that they are essentially non-perturbative objects. When we are thinking of non-perturbative calculation within the context of QCD, the natural method for an ab initio non-perturbative calculation in QCD is QCD discretized in a space-time lattice like this one and simulated in a supercomputer like this one over here. However, PDFs are defined as an expectation value of a bilocal operator evaluated along a light-like line. And clearly, we cannot evaluate this on a Euclidean setup where all our simulations are taking place, so because the light cone in a Euclidean space is going to collapse into a light point, because this is what is z squared equals to 0 in a space with Euclidean signature. But being in Euclidean space is very important for the lattice because we are sampling the path integral with the Markov chain Monte Carlo methods, and we need a probability distribution. And the probability distribution is given by the Boltzmann weight, and this is going to be like exp of minus s, the Euclidean action. If we are Vic rotated to the Minkowski space, we have exp of is. This is an oscillating factor. It could be positive, it could be negative. Therefore, we have a sign problem. This is not a bona fide positive definite probability. So we must stay in Euclidean space for the lattice simulations. And this, for many, many years, was one of the limiting bottlenecks for the study of this kind of observatory. So what has the lattice community been doing up to, let's say, very recently? The lattice community has been using the operator product expansion in order to associate Mellin moments of the PDF, such as average x to the power k, here, in order to relate these Mellin moments to local local operators, such as this one. So average x to the power k is related to the insertion of a gamma matrix and a string of k covariant derivatives. And once you subtract the traces and you symmetrize, you pick up the leading the twist 2 contribution. And a priori, computing moments would not be a problem at all if actually one is able to compute all moments of the distribution, because we know from basic text mathematics that once we know all the moments of the distribution, then the probability distribution is completely determined. However, these traditional studies, based on the local operators, are limited to the first few, let's say 3 at the maximum moment, due to bad signal to noise ratio, which has to do that in order to go to higher and higher moments, you have to insert more and more momenta. And in a later slide, I will show you how the insertion of more and more momenta is deteriorating your signal to noise ratio. So this is the first bottleneck of the traditional method. However, the second and even more important bottleneck is that we have power divergent mixing on the lattice. And this has to do with the fact that the discretized spacetime does not possess the full rotational symmetry of the continuum. So once you discretize the quantum field theory on a hypercubic box, instead of having O4 as a symmetry of Euclidean Lorentz, the Euclidean Lorentz group, you have H4, the group of hypercubic rotations. And therefore you have operators that normally would belong to different O4 multiplets, and therefore they would not mix with each other under renormalization. However, because you have broken the O4 symmetry down to H4, those operators fall into the same multiplets of H4, and therefore they are mixing with power divergent coefficients under renormalization. And therefore, it's an absolutely no-go with the traditional methods to go beyond average x to the power 3. Okay, this is a compilation of moments, like the first moment, with a traditional non-local operator with one covariant derivative. And there are many, many lattice studies. This is the value of phenomenology, this black dot. And this is a function of the pion mass, because usually, in order to make the simulations cheaper, we work with a heavier pion mass. And however, still they not agreeing with phenomenology, also because all these studies are only studies based on one lattice spacing and so on, so they have a lot of systematics. Okay, so since the lattice for the moment, up to now, is trying and striving to determine the pattern distributions, there's been a huge ongoing effort from the phenomenological community to determine the PDFs by performing fits, global fits, to experimental data from several hard scattering cross-sections, such as lepton-proton or proton-proton collisions. And the idea is very simple. One can combine the most PDF-sensitive data and the highest precision QCD and electroweak calculations. However, pay attention, always under the working assumption that the standard model holds. And one can actually employ a statistically robust fitting methodology in order to fit and extract the PDF. Actually, this way one can achieve quite high precision for the cases that data are abundant, so for the case of the nucleon and unpolarized PDFs. However, also the methods of global fits have issues if we start thinking about targets where we don't have an abundance of experimental data, let's say the case of the pion, or even if we go back to the nucleon and we start thinking about polarized PDFs, where there's also not so big abundance of experimental data. Also, don't forget that these people are always working under the assumption that the standard model holds and there are no BSM contributions. Because if those could be, instead of putting those contributions into the perturbative part, into the known perturbative part, they would tend accidentally to introduce them into the non-perturbative part in the PDFs. Therefore, we should have an ab initio calculation of PDFs. This is a compilation of results from global fits and from different collaborations, NNPDF, CT, MMHT. You see that grosso modo, they are in agreement with each other. However, there's a common feature, and the common feature has to do with the explosion of the error budget in the large X region, which I said also before is precisely the region where the lattice would be immediately of help. Okay, so more information about the large X discrepancies. So in the first plot, we have results for the nucleon from an experiment at Jefferson Lab. And this is a D with respect to the U-quark PDF. And if you look at the X equal to 1 region, we have different expectations based on different models for QCD. Models with or without SU6 symmetry, models based on Dyson-Schwinger equations, or models based on perturbative QCD. And the situation is quite similar also for the pion. The U-bar quark distribution of pi minus was extracted at Fermilab in this experiment. And if we look at the large X behavior of the PDF, so how does it decay around X equal to 1, different models predict different things. And those predictions are encapsulated in this exponent. So the QCD Pardon model says that this exponent should be equal to 2. Perturbative QCD says that this should also pick up a correction from an anomalous dimension gamma. Light front holography says this should be equal to 0. And duality arguments, or based on calculations based on the Nambu-Ioannalassino model, say that this should be equal to 1. For all those reasons, it is clear that an ab initio non-perturbative QCD calculation is very timely and imperative. So what do we do on the lattice when we compute PDFs? Let me introduce the formalism. This is the formalism introduced by our collaborator, Anatoly Radyushkin, back in 2016, 2017. So the starting point is the equal time hadronic matrix element with the quark and anti-quark fields separated by finite space-like distance z. So this is the matrix element that we study, where we have inserted between boosted hadronic states, boosted with momentum p, this operator psi bar, gamma, E is the straight line gauge link connecting 0 to z times psi. And actually, one can use Lorentz invariance in order to decompose this matrix element M into two matrix elements, M sub p and M sub z. The first matrix element, M sub p, is mainly related to leading twist effects, and from that, eventually, one could extract the PDF if one could try to brute force the limit z squared going to 0. However, it has also higher twist contaminations. However, the second part of the matrix element, M sub z, is entirely related to higher twist effects, and we want to get rid of this. And we can do so with a smart choice of kinematics, so taking the separation z along the z-axis, the momentum along the z-axis, and alpha equals to 0 makes the second part of the matrix element drop out. What is interesting is to see that also this distribution has two arguments, which are both Lorentz invariant quantities, z squared, and this scalar product z dot p. And this scalar product z dot p is going to play a chief role in what comes next, is called as the Ioffe time, and actually physically you can understand it as the Fourier dual of the Bjorken X variable. So when I was saying that for the lattice it is easier to do large X, is because of the Fourier duality. Large X corresponds to small nu means momenta which are relatively small, and then we're not going to have all these issues of infinite momentum requirements. And therefore, this is why large X is more easier to be studied on the lattice. So what we are studying are these Ioffe time distributions, which could be thought of as defined at the scale mu squared, given by 1 divided by the separation z squared at leading log level, and they are nothing more than the Fourier transform of the regular PDFs, as you can see from this expression. So basically, it's like a coordinate representation of the Bjorken X PDFs, this Ioffe time distribution. So knowing the one is exactly like knowing the other. Okay, let us talk about some lattice QCD requirements. So the largest momentum on the lattice, since you know very well that the lattice spacing is a cutoff in terms of momenta, the largest momentum is given by A times P max is equal to, let's say, pi over 2, should be of order 1. For a lattice spacing of 0.1 Fermi, P max, if we take the scale lambda around 300 MeV, if we have the lattice spacing, we can go up to 6 GeV. However, I have this comment that P max equals 3 GeV is relatively easy achievable with moderate values of the lattice spacing, but is actually still be demanding due to statistical noise. P max equals 6 GeV is exponentially harder. It requires very, very fine values of the lattice spacing. However, as I will stress in what comes next, we need also eventually large momentum. It's not mandatory, but it's very welcome because it is increasing the coverage of the Ioffe time nu. We can go to larger and larger values of the Ioffe time. Okay, so let us have a look at these plots, at these cartoons, in order to understand better the signal-to-noise ratio. The signal-to-noise ratio, as was explained by Parisi and Lepage more than 35 years ago, is given by this ratio. You have the observable O divided by the square root of the variance. So if we have a nucleon correlator, let's say with a nucleon at rest, so we expect that this decays as exp of minus m nucleon times t. If we boost the nucleon with momentum p, instead of having the mass over here, we're going to have the relativistic energy momentum dispersion relationship. And in order to understand, to compute the variance is given by the modulus, by the square root of this diagram times its complex conjugate. And this combination is dominated, if you open up those lines for the quarks, by the state of 3 pions. Therefore, the signal-to-noise ratio for these baryonic correlators is degrading as x to the minus energy minus 3/2 of m pi times t. Okay, but then let's see how can we obtain the Oppenheim PDF, at least theoretically, and then we will see how we can obtain it in practice. One could, in principle, try to brute force, as I said before, this z to 0 limit, so m sub p nu of comma z squared. However, there are large order z squared corrections, and those corrections in practice prohibit such an extraction. However, we can profit from the conservation of the vector current, which looks like this, in order to form a ratio. Because in a ratio, z-square corrections, which are actually related, if you look at this paper of Radiushkin, to the transverse structure of the hadron, would tend to cancel. And actually, the ratio has two big advantages. So you have much smaller order z-square corrections, which are related to higher twist effects. But you have also another huge advantage, which has to do with renormalization. This matrix element has been shown to renormalize multiplicatively. So once you form a ratio, all the renormalization constants, all the UV singularities are exactly cancelled. You have a UV finite quantity, and once you compute this UV finite quantity on the lattice, you can safely extrapolate to the continuum limit, take the cutoff to infinity, or the lattice spacing to 0 at fixed nu and z squared. And also what is extremely important is that this quantity is also an RGI quantity, it's a renormalization group invariant quantity, and is agnostic to the regulator, if the regulator would be lattice, or if the regulator would be dimensional regularization, for example. And this is also going to give us other advantages that I will describe in the next slides. So by forming this ratio, you simplify your life tremendously, because non-perturbative renormalization on the lattice is another beast on its own with a huge amount of systematics. And by this idea, we can get rid of that immediately. Okay.
The tree that you always is the same direction you had previously singled out.
Say it again. I didn't hear you.
Sorry, the Z3 you're using in this ratio, it's the same direction that you had previously.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
So, sorry, I just wanted to make sure I followed.
Oh, no problem. Okay, so let's go now and look at the numerical implementation. I will try to follow a rather historical approach and to take you through our papers, or some of our papers, in order for you to be able to follow our thread of logic of how all those things were developed, one idea after another. So in the first paper, back in 2017, we first wanted to see if the idea of Radiushkin, in order to obtain a PDF out of this pseudo-distribution formalism, was actually making sense at all. And therefore, when you are trying to test an idea numerically, obviously you are going to start with a relatively cost-effective, cheap setup, instead of investing all your computational time on something that in the end might not work. So in the first paper, we worked in the quenched approximation. That means that the configurations, the lattice gauge fields, were generated by ignoring the back reaction of the fermions, by ignoring the fermion determinant. This is an approximation. And if one does so, one has to be limited to heavy values of the pion mass. In the quench approximation, because of some lattice technicalities that I could explain later, you cannot go to very light values of the pion mass. But okay, we wanted to do a first and quick check in order to see if this idea was giving something looking close to a PDF. So we started with this unphysical approximation with a heavy pion mass of 600 MeV. Then we got convinced that this works, and I will try to convince you in the next slides. And then, of course, in every lattice field theory calculation, you have a series of limits which need to be taken. So apart from the fact that you have to use dynamical quarks, and we're doing in all the recent papers, of course, with the 2+1 flavors, so UT degenerate plus a strange quark. Then, of course, you have to take the lattice spacing to 0, so you need different values of the lattice spacing. We have a published study with 2. Now we're going to put another one out with 3 values of the lattice spacing. You have to extrapolate to the physical pion mass of 135 MeV if you are not directly simulating at the physical pion mass. And then, of course, since we are talking about these extended objects, as I said before, we have a psi bar and a psi connected by a very long Wilson line, which could be having a length like 1/4 of the size of your box. One should also check explicitly that you don't have finite volume effects, because you could have severe finite volume effects if you are studying something which is like only 4 times smaller than your box. And we have very detailed studies of these things. So by fixing the lattice spacing, increasing the volume of the box, and so on and so forth. Okay, let us have a look at some data from the first paper. These are over here plots of the real and the imaginary parts of the pseudo-Ioffe time distribution of that ratio. And for the guidance of your eyes, I have plotted some curves which are representing the real and imaginary Fourier transforms of Q valence, which could be taken by these ansatz. And as you look, the real part is nicely described by this cosine Fourier transform of this ansatz. Well, also the imaginary part is somehow well described, but as you can see over here, there is some sort of a gap in this hump over here, which we should try to understand better. In order to understand this gap better and why do we have this gap, this has to do with one could understand it better by looking at CP even and odd combinations. So the CP even combination is given precisely by this QV, Q valence. However, the odd combination has this extra component of Q bar, an anti-quark distribution. So by assuming a non-zero anti-quark distribution, you can nicely fill this gap over here, and the agreement becomes much better also for the imaginary part. And then here we have the real part and the imaginary part, nicely described. But for those of you who are very picky and very careful, you can see that there is still some sort of a residual Z dependence. And this can be better understood if you choose a data point, like here, where I have plotted the data as a function of the Ioffe time nu. And you can go to a particular nu where we have several data points corresponding to different values of Z. But if you remember, Z, or the inverse of Z, was related to the scale of the PDF. So different values of Z squared for the same nu correspond to the Ioffe time distribution at different scales. And of course, a natural question to ask is the following. Can the residual scatter in the data points be actually consistent with the evolution equations for the PDFs? We will actually solve the evolution equation at leading order, which is actually relating the Ioffe time distribution at the scale Z prime to the Ioffe time distribution at the scale Z, as you see by this equation. It's a leading order equation, so it's obviously only applicable at small values of Z. And once we do so, you see these are the data before evolution, after evolution. You see already that that evolution had a drastic effect. There is a drastic reduction in scatter, which is indicating that evolution can indeed collapse all the data to the same universal curve. And the same thing is true by comparing left and right for the imaginary part. Okay, so we are done with evolution, and we have all the data in the same universal curve. And what we can do, we take our evolved data, and this is what we did in the first paper. we can fit them with a cosine Fourier transform of this ansatz, which is a typical ansatz for PDFs, x to the power x, x to the power a, 1 minus x to the power b. So the cosine Fourier transform of that. We pick up some exponents, 0.36 and 3.95. In the first paper back in 2017, we didn't know, we hadn't worked out the matching from our scheme to MS bar, and we didn't also know how to properly set the scale. So in that paper, we assumed by making estimates with the value of the lattice spacing and bringing everything to the scale of 1 GeV, that now we know how to do all these things properly, how to match to MS bar and so on and so forth. This has been worked out. So this manipulation of things, so fitting to this cosine Fourier transform, gave us this orange PDF at the scale of 1 GeV. However, in order to compare with the global fits, we have to use the Altarelli-Parisi equations in order to scale up to 2 GeV, because this is where phenomenologists like to give their predictions, and then we get this blue curve. And what you see for both the intermediate and large X region, despite the crudeness of our approximation, so lattice configurations ignoring the fermion determinant, quenched, 600 MeV pion, one value of the lattice spacing, one value of the physical volume, and so on and so forth, it was pretty striking that despite the crudeness of all these approximations, our PDF can actually even fit in the same plot with respect to the extractions of global fits. And this gave us confidence in order to push forward this activity. Another sanity check that one can perform is one can try to extract the lowest PDF moments from our data and compare with the literature. What we presented, the method that we presented in this paper, is the following: that one could actually look at the derivative with respect to the Offe time of the Offe time distribution, evaluated at mu equal to 0, and this is related to moments, plus higher twist effects and so on and so forth. And the huge advantage of this method proposed in this paper is, if you remember, this ratio was a renormalization group invariant quantity. Therefore, it doesn't know anything about the lattice, and it doesn't know anything about the pathologies that the lattice was bringing when you were trying to calculate moments based on the local operator. I told you about this power divergent mixing, and so on and so forth. So with our method, by looking at the non-local operator with a long Wilson line, and not the traditional method of the local operators, as long as you can resolve properly numerically this derivative, you can compute whatever moment you want to compute. Of course, in practice, given the coverage of the Offe time and given how dense this coverage is, you are limited. So the best we have done in a paper for the pion was to go up to x to the power 4. Now we're developing better and better configurations in order to push that limit. And this method knows no limits, while the method of the traditional operator was forced to go up to x to the power 3. And why this is important? Because this makes our goal twofold. The first part of our goal is obviously to study the Bjorken X dependence of the light cone PDFs, but we can use our methods to compute moments, because if we can compute moments very precisely and take care of all the systematics, we can give them data for the moments to the community of global fits in order to use them as extra constraints of the global fits. So in this first paper, we're making comparisons with the traditional method. This is for average x squared, and these also checks were passed, so that gave us extra confidence to keep moving forward. And now I would like to change gears for a second.
Just a picky question. How did you set your error bars here?
What do you mean? This is like the jackknife error by doing a full statistical analysis of this moment. This is only a statistical error. It has no systematic.
It's statistical error. Okay.
Yeah, it's only a statistical error with the jackknife sampling, because it's one value of the pioneers. But what is important is that we picked up a calculation done by this QCDSF collaboration that was done in the same exact values of the parameters, same value of
No,
the parameters,
you're
spacing. So in order not to compare apples with oranges, so this is a statistical error, yeah.
uh-huh. No, great result. Thanks.
So every lattice calculation, as I said before, has different systematics. So as I said, you need to take the continuum limit, you need to take the infinite volume limit, you need to simulate the physical pi mass, and those pretty much are okay. I'm not going to say they're easy to do, but we know what to do about them. Okay, you need to have a very well optimized code. You need to have a lot of computational time. You need to have labor. You need to have people to analyze the data. But it is a very systematic procedure how to take all these limits. Here, I would like to change gears for a moment and talk about one of the systematics, which I think is one of the most pressing in all those studies, and is actually quite related to one of the systematics that is also involved in studies that people from Santiago de Compostela might be studying with, like heavy ion collisions. And this has to do with an inverse problem that we are facing. So what we are computing on the lattice for pattern distribution functions or distribution amplitudes is defined by inverting a quasi-Fourier transform, let's say a cosine Fourier transform. So in principle, we compute this Joffre time distribution M, and we want to solve this integral equation for this QV. We want to extract the Bjorken X PDF. And of course, if you are a very famous guy like my collaborator Anatoly Radyushkin, you can say, okay, I don't care. I extract the Joffre time distribution and that's it. And then the phenomenologists should invert their PDFs in order to compare with us. But okay, I'm not here to tell you, to give you this answer. I'm going to tell you what we try to do in order to solve for this QV. And why it is quite complicated to solve for this QV. Because we only have a handful of lattice data for this quantity, and we need to reconstruct a full analytic function. So let's say we have 20 data points, and as if this was not enough, in order to make the inverse problem mathematically ill-defined, the cosine is integrated from 0 to 1, where it's not an orthogonal function. So taking those two issues together at face value make the inversion of this integral equation extremely difficult and ill-defined. But how difficult it is and how ill-defined, I will show you in the next slides. So what we would do in the first approach, if we had to do this inverse problem, what any one of us would do, one would try to discretize this integral equation with one's favorite methods from numerical methods. Let's say take the trapezoid rule, and this is the discretized version of this Fourier transform, as you can see over here, and we can cast our problem in a matrix equation. So we have a vector M, which is given by the dot product of a kernel matrix C, which is the cosine kernel, dot Q, and Q is the unknown Bjorken X PDF. So as long as this matrix C is easy to be inverted, then we can invert it and we can apply it to M and obtain Q. But okay, let's see, is this matrix in practice easily invertible? In order to understand if it is or if it's not, obviously we have to look at the spectrum, at the eigenvalues of this matrix. And in order to look at the eigenvalues of this matrix, let us look how those change as we change the coverage in Joffre time. And why I was arguing before that we need to have a good wide coverage in Joffre time. So I will start from the first absolute science fiction scenario, which are these orange data points. So if we magically could tomorrow have data extending from 0 to 40 pi, obviously 40 pi is not chosen at random, but it is in order to have the cosine being orthogonal, the eigenvalues of this kernel matrix would be of order 1 and would be totally trivial to invert this matrix equation. Well, the second science fiction scenario would be if we magically could have data extending from 0 to 100. Then also almost all the eigenvalues would be almost of order 1, and it would be relatively easy to do this inversion. But let's come back to reality and let's see what we have right now. Right now we have something which looks most likely like the purple data points. So we have coverage up to mu equals 7 or 8. And you see that this comes with an exponential degradation of the spectrum. We have almost zero eigenvalues, almost zero modes, 10 to the negative 40 to machine precision. And this is impossible to invert this equation in a trustworthy manner. In order to keep arguing why the naive reconstruction is very, very bad and why other colleagues of mine should eventually stop doing it, let us have a look at the reconstruction in practice using some mock data. Okay, let us go back to the absolute science fiction scenario, coverage of nu extending from 0 to 40 pi, and then we have our data points. And if we can have data from 0 to 40 pi, we can have a relative error. You can observe always here the relative error, 10 to the negative 2, 10 to the negative 3. And if we had this magic interval for of a time, the reconstruction would be perfect, even the naive reconstruction. If we start slowly moving towards reality and get out of the dream world, so go to nu from 0 to 100, which probably we'll have in 20 years, then already I have to make the relative errors smaller, 10 to the negative 4, 10 to the negative 5, and you see that the reconstruction is already having some hiccup. And if we go to something more realistic that we expect to have in the next 5 years, so nu equals spanning from 0 to 20, so the relative error has to become even smaller, 10 to the negative 5, 10 to the negative 6, which is extremely difficult to achieve in a lattice simulation. And even with these values of relative error, you see that the reconstruction is awful. And even if magically we could have ideal data means data with zero error bars, with machine epsilon precision error bars, you see that there are still some lingering oscillations. And these oscillations that you can see in the data is the resurfacing, is another manifestation of the inverse problem, which is very ill-defined. So what we try to do in this paper with Karpi, Orginos, and Rotkop was to use methods that probably you are very well aware of those in the heavy ion community, where you want to compute transport coefficients of the quark-gluon plasma, and the transport coefficients are somehow related to the zero Matsubara frequency behavior of a Minkowskian correlator. But on the lattice, as I said before, we have the correlator of the energy momentum tensor computed in Euclidean spacetime, and somehow with a handful of data you want to perform an analytic continuation to Minkowski space. And some of the methods that that people are using have been tested by us in this paper. So these methods include the Bayesian reconstruction, the maximum entropy method, the Backus-Gilbert algorithm, a hybrid Monte Carlo evaluation of the chi-square functional, and neural networks. And we showed that one can capitalize of the good scanning in Ioffe time and use this advanced reconstruction method in order to perform this Fourier transform and go from the Ioffe time distribution, where you have a limited amount of data for the Ioffe time distribution, and going up to a new max, let's say 10 or 20, to obtain the full X dependence of the Bjorken X PDF. And you can see that those methods, as long as you have a good scanning of Ioffe time, can give you even good information also for the small x regime, because the small x regime requires very high momenta, and it's not only a problem for the lattice, it's also a problem for experiments and phenomenology. So here lattice and phenomenology or experiments are facing the same problem, the same way that you need to push the energies of the experiments to very high energies in order to probe the small x region, the same way the lattice community needs to push the lattice spacing to extremely fine values in order to be able to say something reasonable for the small x region. So here I will just flash through some results from newer papers, not all the way to the newest paper. So these are papers with dynamical fermions, 2+1 flavors. This is an ensemble with a coarse value of the lattice spacing, still a heavier pion mass. 1 month ago, we put out a paper with a physical pion mass. I'm not going to show you results from that. You can see it on Spires. Things changed a little bit, but in this seminar, I just wanted to introduce these methods to you and to give you the general picture of the general scheme of things. So I'm not going to talk about precision because the precision is not there. We are still, we have a long way ahead of us in order to be able to talk about precision. So this is for the nucleon, then the same value of the lattice spacing, bigger volume to check for finite volume effects, and we saw that they were small. A finer value of the lattice spacing. This is the Offe time distribution. This is the PDF. Then these are results for the moments, average x squared, the moments compared to the moments from NNPDF, MSTW collaboration, the CJ, and so on and so forth. Still, we are in a good track, but of course there's a lot to be done. Apart from the nucleon, we have also been studying the pion in another paper, and we were able to obtain results for the Offe time distribution and QV for the pion with these exponents. Still, this is at a relatively coarser value of the lattice spacing, 0.127 Fermi, a relatively heavy value of the pion mass. Well, this is one published paper. Now we are working to make these things better and better and go closer and closer to the physical values. These are the data evolved to a scale of 20 GeV squared, because phenomenologists like to present their data in this scale. This is X times QV, where people want to plot data in this way. And this is QV, our calculation compared to different extractions from phenomenology. And once again, given the limitations, as I said, the lattice spacing is relatively coarse, 0.127 Fermi, 400 MeV pion mass. It's looking good, but as I said, in order to be able to talk about precision, we'll have to wait for a while. But still, it's not very bad, given the fact that all those efforts started almost like 3 years ago. This is a compilation of results for the moments, how one can go from the pseudo PDF moment to the actual PDF moment, and how can one obtain the final result with a weighted average, because from each z-square we can extract a value for a moment, from the first moment all the way to the fourth moment. In the paper we have an analysis about discretization errors, about higher twist effects which could contaminate the moments, and how we cure the data from these artifacts. So in these two plots, which I have taken from a community-wide paper, I would like to argue why it is actually relatively important for the lattice and the phenomenology to work together. So what happens if you look at the left-hand side plot, we have the S plus quark PDF and its percentage uncertainty, basically the percentage uncertainty of the S plus quark PDF. The black line is what happens to the percentage PDF uncertainty if phenomenology, global fits, and lattice do not talk to each other. So it's constant throughout the whole range of X. However, if there is a collaboration, the lattice community could provide results, for example, on this plot about the first moment, and here they have studied different scenarios for the error budget of average X, and how would that eventually drive down the uncertainty of the S plus quark PDF, at least for example, the low X regime, as long as we have a very precise extraction of average X from the lattice in order for them to constrain their fits. On the right-hand side, a similar game was played in this community-wide paper, but now for the deep bar quark PDF. But instead of the lattice providing information about moments, in these scenarios D, E, F, the lattice provided information about the functional X behavior of the PDF, of the Bjorken X PDF, in the large X region. So this can also help to drive down this error budget of the extraction of the LightCom PDFs. So these plots show that it is actually important for lattice and phenomenology to be able to work together and to exchange data. This brings me to my conclusions, because we are running out of time. So PDFs, I stressed a lot that as theoretical inputs, they are needed to all hadron scattering experiments, and in some cases they are the largest theory uncertainty. The lattice community is by now able to provide ab initio determinations of the PDFs without theoretical abstractions that we had up to, let's say, 3 years ago. The interplay between lattice QCD and global fits, I think I explained why it is very important. PDFs are also very important in the search of new physics for beyond standard model studies. What comes next? Of course, we have to refine our results for the unpolarized PDFs, what I showed to you today. But then next in our agenda comes polarized PDFs, the transversity PDF, eventually gluon PDFs and generalized pattern distributions. The last two are relatively more difficult. The first two are relatively very easy, and we could do it even now. We are just only a finite number of people with a huge amount of data. And many thanks for your attention.
Thanks, Savas. Thanks a lot for this great talk. Let me stop the recording.